Nick, so let's get into this, and I'll preface it. I think, it was yesterday. Nick sent something in our show group chat about three players on each of the Vancouver Canucks and the Ottawa
I
Senators.
think it was from James Cebulski, just so we're given credit. I think that's who tweeted it.
Those three players were Elias Pettersson, Brock Boeser, Quinn Hughes, Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, Thomas Chabot, and essentially we don't see eye to eye on ranking those six players. Nick, I will let you don't get too much into it, but go one to six there for me.
Yeah, well, so to be clear, I think the actual question from Cebulski was which three would you rather have? The Vancouver trio you named off or the Ottawa one? So to sort of help rank something like that, I numbered them off 1 to 6, just thinking that would help a little bit. So I went. Elias Pettersson is obviously number one. I think that's pretty clear. The highest ceiling by far in that group and stuff like that. He on his day is a top 10 player in the NHL. You can easily make that case. And then Quinn Hughes at number 2, again, very high ceiling. And I sort of tried to balance this out between what they can be, what they are right now. Just what they are right now, I put Chabot at number 3 for me, Tkachuk at 4, Stützle at 5, and then 6, Brock Boeser. But again, that's all very dependent on what Tim Stützle's development ends up being. And if Brady Tkachuk can add more offense to his game and how far up that list he can get. So, but for now, I still would probably say you got to give the edge to the Vancouver trio just because we know more about them and what they are.
So naturally, I would agree. I also had Pettersson at the top, and I made sure we were all in agreement that Pettersson will remain at the top. And I had Quinn Hughes number 2 because, and like this year, granted this year has not been kind to him, both just his play on ice and what's happened to him off the ice, whether it's true or not. But I have Quinn Hughes as 2. I had Tkachuk as 3, and then 4 and 5. I will change my answer from what I said. I'll put Chabot at 4, Boeser at 5, Stützle at 6. And obviously this is right now, I could absolutely see Stützle jumping a number of spots, but that's where I have it right now. Now I'm going to kind of spiral off of this and involve our friend Patrick over there. Patrick, we're going to talk Habs here in a second, but before we get into that, can I hear your 1 to 6 on these 6 players?
So this is tough because kind of like Nick, I tried to balance out who is the best right now and who will be the best. I think Pettersson is the unanimous number 1. I think he's only going to get better. I don't know if anyone else becomes better than Pettersson. I had Quinn Hughes number 2 because I think a number 1 defenseman like that who can skate and generate the offense he has. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's the absence of Chris Tanev. I'm sure that plays a factor, but him having a down year, and it is a down year, he's been brutal, but still rack up that many points as a defenseman, that's still pretty impressive. This is where I kind of had some difficulty because I think it's very close between Tkachuk and Boeser. As an all-around player, I prefer Tkachuk. I like his defensive impact. I like his offensive impact. But at the same time, there are a lot of concerns about his finishing ability. He has the lowest goals scored above expected, I think for like the past 2 years now. And for the amount of chances he gets, he should be burying them more.
It's interesting you say that because I had Tkachuk a clear 3. I had a blurred line between Chabot and Boeser. But
yes, if as an all-around player, I'll go Tkachuk, but I think you can hear an argument for Boeser there, just because Boeser's finishing ability, but all-around play isn't great. And then I have Chabot, but I think the 3 to 5 is very close. I think you could have an argument for Chabot at 3rd because he is also number 1 defenseman. And then I have Stützle just for right now because, talented rookie, all that stuff. I didn't expect him to make the NHL, honestly, right out of his European play, but he will be good. It's just a matter of when. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can easily, if we do this list in like 2 years, Stützle's anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4. Yes. Easily.
So the core of this concept was, and we'll make this quick, if you could have either trio on your team right now, which one would you take? Would you all say Vancouver?
I'm probably still taking Vancouver right now. Just again, like I said earlier, we know more about this trio. Ottawa's more the mystery box, and so you go with what you know.
Okay. Patrick, can you name me the 3 best players on the Montreal Canadiens in this context? I'm not sure if that really matters, but for example, I wouldn't put I don't know, JT Miller on this list. He's just not really in that age group, I guess. So 3 best players on the Habs in this context.
I can start with defenseman because that's an easy one. I think you'd have to go Jeff Petry. I think he is one of the best defensemen in the North Division. He's having a much better season than Hughes, both offensively and defensively. I think that's easy. I think Nick would probably agree. Forward is where it gets a little bit tricky. I would have to say Brendan Gallagher. I know Brendan Gallagher is not the flashy, I don't know, he doesn't play a nice way, but he's one of the best 5-on-5 play drivers in the entire league. Only Ovechkin has a higher 5v5 goals per 60 rate than Brendan Gallagher. Consistent 30-goal scorer. No one really talks about it because they're all greasy goals, but Brendan Gallagher is a top 15, arguably a top 10 right winger in the NHL. So I'd have to say Brendan Gallagher. After Brendan Gallagher,
Surprised Suzuki wasn't a shoe-in here. I thought.
I don't think yet.
Who else are you thinking about?
I find it interesting that a 3rd overall pick from a couple of years ago isn't in this conversation.
Well, okay, you know what? Since we're talking about that, I wanted to save this debate for another episode. I think Sens fans need to stop acting like Tkachuk was the obvious pick at number 3, because he wasn't, and he wasn't the obvious pick at number 4. Now, we don't have to get into this, but no one would deny that Tkachuk is the better player right now, and any Habs fan who's saying Tkachuk isn't the best player is kidding themselves. But Tkachuk was not a consensus top 5 pick, and neither was Kotkaniemi. The debate between 3 to 5 was Zadina, Hughes, and Hughes, and then you had the possibility of Tkachuk and Kotkaniemi joining.
I think we can be we do have to say that for another one, because I can unload on that one right now. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah. So for the 3rd, if I'm judging on this year alone, I'd probably say Toffoli, just because of his goal scoring pace. He's also another fantastic play driving winger. Okay. But I'll go Gallagher, Petry, and Toffoli, and maybe Anderson, just because of his all-around impact on the game.
A bit older, but that's okay. So where do you see them sliding into the 6 that we've already talked about? Pettersson, Hughes, Tkachuk, Boeser, Chabot, Stützle.
I think this year Jeff Petry's a better defenseman than Quinn Hughes.
It's hard. It's probably more worth asking which 3 would you take? Like, would you take the Montreal 3 over either of the other 3?
Yeah.
And my answer is probably not.
No, I wouldn't.
I would.
I think Pettersson just carries that much weight, if I'm being honest.
No, yeah, I would take Gallagher over any of the forwards not named Pettersson.
Elias.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Right now, I would take Gallagher over.
Actually, you know what? That is tricky. That's a tough one. But yeah, I will. I would probably agree with you. Yeah. Okay.
No one talks about Gallagher, man. He's really underrated. And the whole
off the top of my head, I struggle to say Gallagher is clear and above Tkachuk, but saying that also says, of course, he is. So that is a tricky one. Nick, do you have any input on that?
I still think, Gallagher is probably better right now. I still think Brady Tkachuk with a more consistent spot in his lineup, more consistent line mates and stuff like that. I feel like Gallagher's situation, Montreal with Tatar and Deneau, really suits him well, and he's able to produce a lot. I think Tkachuk just really hasn't had any consistency in terms of his lineup spot at all in his NHL career, but has taken good steps this year in terms of that. So I think he can easily, in about a year or so, be considered ahead of Gallagher in that conversation.
And who is your Toffoli?
Toffoli's having a really good year.
That's tough because he's again.
Year, yeah.
He's having a really good year this year. If he can do this again next year, then I'm all for it.
I think the conversation gets a lot more interesting in a year or two when Caulfield comes up, and if he ends up being the dynamic goal scorer, DeBrincat, for example.
That's a big if, but
he broke.
They need to get that guy in the lineup.
Yeah,
that's their last like transaction, right?
But that's the thing. It's like they're waiting. Yeah, they have one call up left, but this all could have been avoided because the day before the trade deadline, they called up like 4 players from the taxi squad when they didn't have to do that. If they just didn't call them up, then you could have a bunch of call ups and you're saving this one call up on your best player that you need. It's like, what's the point? You only have one left. You might as well use it on the guy that matters. Anyway, Luke, go ahead.
Let's quickly add the Leafs to this conversation because why not? Matthews and Marner. I don't want to say Tavares. I just don't think he fits into that conversation. Matthews, Marner, who would be your third from the Leafs? And I'll be the first one to say, obviously, you're going to take the Leafs trio, but how close would you say the other 3 are to that? But first, who is your third from the Leafs? You can't say Tavares.
Probably Nylander for me.
Nylander.
I think if like we got to balance out. Like Tavares probably still is the third best forward on the Leafs, but I think you'd say Nylander just because you got to balance out the long term, short term stuff, sort of like we did with all the other ones, or at least tried to. And yeah, obviously you're taking the Leafs. I don't think it's particularly close, just because as good as Elias Pettersson is, like he is like one player, and I don't think Hughes has a very high ceiling, but I still just look at Matthews and Marner and you see 2 guys that are well over a point per game. Nylander's a really good 65 point guy. So I'm probably saying the Leafs trio, and it's not particularly close, but again, we have to see what Hughes' ceiling ends up being. Pettersson's very good. I'd say he's better than Marner. He's not better than Matthews. So yeah, I think Hughes and his development is what makes it close.
Go ahead.
Hey, funny you mentioned Hughes and Marner, because I remember sending a clip from Overdrive, Pettersson and Marner. The guys on Overdrive were talking about it, and they were saying that Pettersson does not drive play or create stuff the same way Marner does. And I figured it would be unanimous amongst 3 of us that if you're picking a player, you're going to take Pettersson no matter what. But that got the attention of Leafs Twitter, who a lot of them said Marner's the better player. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think any of us would disagree with it. It was the same debate when there was the Sebastian Aho, Mitch Marner debate. You're taking the center. You're taking the guy who plays a more important position. And yeah, I just think it's funny that.
Yeah, it's silly to rank Marner ahead of Pettersson, in my opinion. I think Marner's good, but Pettersson's a lot better.
Yeah,
I agree, believe it or not. And I will say, for all the weight, I would say Pettersson carries. Matthews is miles above that. So we'll circle back next year. But let's talk.
Not a Leafs defenseman though. There's no defenseman.
There is no there. I think all teams. Yeah, the Leafs have the worst. If you pick the best defenseman from each team, the Leafs have the worst one. I think we'd all agree. Let's get away